Salutations, all you bards, clerics, monks, wizards, and nerds. Welcome to Token Minority Report on Unsafe Space. I am your minority, Beverly. Today is Friday, April 29th, 2022. First things first, my producer slash intern, who's totally not Carter, is out sick today and bedridden and being a little baby. So if things go awry, I will still be blaming him. But hopefully he feels better soon and stops being a little wuss. Housekeeping book club this Sunday, folks, May 1st at 12 p.m. ET. It's still Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, hosted by the wonderful Thomas St. Thomas. Still the abridged version as well. So if you are a speed reader or can listen to the audiobook at like 5x speed, then you probably will still have time to read it. To get a link to be on the video in the discussion, just email me, speak@, or Beverly at unsafespace.com, and I will add you to the list and email you the link tonight. So today we're going to talk RPG, D&D, OSR, and other acronyms, which is why I'm also wearing this D&D dress today. It kind of matches my skin because it's yellow. I guess I can show it here. It's hard to see. I've got a cartoony beholder, mind flayer, mimic, slime, dragon somewhere. Yeah, dragon. I got this at Gen Con in Indianapolis a few years back, which I also have a problem with getting too many dice when I'm there too, because I collect them all. But let's introduce today's guest, the RPG Pundit. He's a game designer and commentator on tabletop RPGs. He has produced and consulted on more than 100 RPG products, and as a consultant, helped design the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, 5th edition. He is a hard advocate for free speech and a prominent critic of wokeism in the RPG hobby. Most of his best-selling game products are part of the old-school Renaissance design movement, creating new and interesting variants of the original D&D rules. So with that, welcome to the show, RPG Pundit.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's nice to have you. I've seen a variety of your videos, and including seeing at least one cat. I know you have the cat Meatball, right?
Yeah. I used to have two. One of them passed away. So
yeah, I heard my boyfriend watches you a lot too. So he had told me about it. But yeah, I've got two cats as well. So I feel the animal life. But so to start things off before we really get into it, one thing I like to ask all the guests, since the show is Token Minority Report, I like to ask, in what way are you a minority? And it doesn't have to be anything physical. It can literally be like you like pineapple pizza, because I do.
In what way am I a minority?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a minority of one. Right? I think that the Ayn Rand, I think, said the smallest minority is the individual.
Yes, and, that's true.
That's the only minority that I think actually should have protection, is the right of the individual.
Yeah. Okay. What a great answer. Starting off, got Rand references and everything. Okay, this is going to be good. Well, okay. So the first game that I like to do, since I don't really know too much about you, I'm terrible at guessing these, but I want to do the 2 truths and a lie. I think I got the only time that I've gotten right was last week. So I was really surprised because I'm terrible at it. So if you want to go ahead and list off, we've got 2 truths, 1 lie. I have to try and guess the lie. And if I fail, you get points. If I guess correctly, you still get points because I'm excited about it. And if you get enough points this episode, then you win the game.
Okay. Well, I hope that I don't think a lot of my audience is here by the looks of it, because it's too early in the day, I think, for most people watch my videos. This is 2 p.m. Eastern, right? That's a strange hour to be doing a show like this because everybody's still at work.
That's how I feel too, and I really want to move this to the evening. And but again, Carter's on, so I need to talk to him. I keep trying to push for it. I'm hoping eventually I'll be able to move this to an evening time.
A lot more views, a lot more views in the live stream itself.
Thank you. I'm glad that we have this on recording now too, to say like, hey, I don't want to do this time slot. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, maybe if it was on the literal weekend, that might be.
If you think people would watch like on a Saturday?
Weekday evenings are probably the best. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm on a show called Inappropriate Characters, and we do it on Sunday nights, and that works pretty well too, though.
Oh, really? Okay, good to know.
I guess people are winding down for the end of the weekend. But
yeah.
Anyway, so you wanted me to give Tutu Salai. If there are any of my fans on the chat, I hope you don't give it away because you might know this. Which of them which of them are true, anyways. So here we go. Number one, I mentioned already in the in my biography, it's pretty well known that I helped create the current edition of Dungeons and Dragons, but less people know that I also helped to create the current edition of the Doctor Who RPG.
Current edition.
Number two, I have lived on 4 different continents. And number 3, I actually wrote the first RPG to feature a transgendered character on the cover.
Character on cover. Okay. So you've got 1, helped create the current edition of the Doctor Who RPG. Number 2, you've lived on 4 different continents. And number 3, you were the first to make an RPG to feature a transgender character on the cover. Okay. Man, all of these seem very plausible because all right. I know I don't know if you've stated where what country you live in now. I know you don't live in like America anymore, but I won't say if it is private.
No, people know that. I live in South America right now.
Okay. Yeah, so all right. Well, all right, people in chat, someone says 1 is the lie. Okay, let me think. Current Doctor Who edition. Are you a Doctor Who fan? This is tough. If you're into fantasy and stuff, Doctor Who's more sci-fi. Indigo Dragon says 3 is a truth. 1, let's see, you lived in 4 different continents if you've traveled around. Yeah, you know what? I think I'm gonna go with number 1 is the... Oh, wait. No, wait. Jaeger says 1 and 3 are true, so that means 2 is the lie. I'm easily swayed by people. So what do I think? Lived on 4 different continents. Transgender character. You know what? I'm still going to say number 1. Number 1 is the lie. Is that?
No, I'm afraid it isn't. I worked as a playtester on the Doctor Who RPG.
Oh,
and
cool.
the several of the rules there, including the most basic mechanic in the final version of how it came out, is thanks to me. But no, the lie is number 2. I've only lived on 3 different continents.
Okay. Like he probably exaggerated and it's probably only 2 or 3, but then and again, I second guess myself and do the wrong one. So, okay, well, can we dive a little bit more into how did you get involved in the Doctor Who thing? How did you participate in that?
That was quite early on. Like we're talking about, this was the Doctor Who produced by Cubicle 7. That was it first came out when it was still David Tennant who was playing the Doctor.
That's
so that gives you an idea of what year it was, right?
Yeah.
So it was they had made a call or had proposed play testers and stuff like that. And at that time, I was already well known as a blogger, but I hadn't really written a lot of product myself. And so I volunteered for that. And there was this, several weeks, couple of months of play testing behind the scenes that was going on as the game was being created. And originally, the creator of the game, whose name escapes me right now because my memory is terrible, he wanted to use a system where you'd only roll a single 6-sided die to determine the results. He wanted a game that was going to be very narrative based and like what in the hobby we call story gaming.
Okay,
and
yeah.
I wanted to make sure that wasn't what happened with Doctor Who, right? So I made it convincing on this like kind of argument that people actually like dice to at the very least let people roll 2 dice instead of 1. So that's how the 2d6 mechanic happened. And then one of the things that was remembered after the Doctor Who RPG came out is like what a lot of people said was like the most innovative thing about the game is the order of action. Because if you've played Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you understand initiative, right? So in D&D, you roll for initiative and you go in the order that you rolled. In Doctor Who, there's a precedence of action where if what you're going to do is talk, you do that first before anybody else gets to do anything, right? And then if all you're doing is running, you get to do that second, right? It all kind of fits the genre of Doctor Who, right? Because you always see that where some aliens are about to shoot him, and then the Doctor starts talking, right?
Yeah.
So that was, and then after that, you can do special actions, and only the last thing that happens is attacks, right? And people thought, oh, this is like super innovative and brilliant and whatever. Well, first of all, I came up with that, but second, I came up with that being inspired by the initiative order in the old red box of Dungeons and Dragons, where it used to be that movement actions happened. You regulated all the movement actions before you did attacks and then before you did magic, right? So all that idea of prioritizing different types of actions in the initiative order is something that I actually borrowed from classic Dungeons and Dragons and just reapplied it in a way that fit the Doctor Who RPG.
That's awesome. So do you recommend the Doctor Who RPG? Then it turned out to be more
the
fun.
Doctor Who RPG did turn out to be a pretty good game. Yeah, and it's been very popular. It's had multiple editions. Of course, I don't recommend current Doctor Who to anyone, sadly.
Yeah, I stopped watching like mid-11th Doctor, I think.
In my mind, the series ended with Capaldi, and that's it. Like nothing existed after that, right? Because the last what happened after is this current run of these last 3 years has been just an absolute travesty.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I definitely had no interest in like continuing on with it. And I mean, even after David Tennant left, I was like, I like Matt Smith, but Tennant was just the best. to me.
We'll have to see now that it's being retaken by Russell T Davies if he can actually.
Oh, is it? I haven't kept up with it at all.
Yeah. They're next year. The BBC is licensing Doctor Who out to Russell T Davies, who has Bad Wolf Productions, it's called, right?
Yeah.
And Bad Wolf Productions has been bought out by Sony. So technically, Sony is going to be creating the next series of Doctor Who. And there's a lot of rumor that they're basically going to just like retcon the last 3 years, because it's just been so disastrous.
I guess it is.
The bottoming out of viewer figures for Doctor Who has been appalling.
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised, but I wonder how they're going to do that. I guess it's time stuff, so they can kind of do anything. But
they can do it like you remember the TV movie, right? That happened like in between the classic series and the new one.
The Ward Doctor.
The one with the eighth Doctor with I forget the actor's name now, but the one that Fox Studios produced, right? And it was pretty awful. But they kind of, when Russell T Davies took over Doctor Who the first time, started the new series, he just slowly started adding back bits from the previous series, but he never went explicitly saying this happened and this didn't. And so eventually the eighth Doctor was part of canon. But the part in the movie that most people hated, where he said that he was half human, was just forgotten. Like that never happened, right? So that's probably what they're going to do here. Like maybe they'll mention that the Doctor was, this current one, but they're not. They're going to get rid of this whole idea that the real first Doctor was a black woman and stuff like that.
Well, I hope that they can I don't know. I guess it's like, retconning is like an easy way out, though. But sometimes, if it was really bad, then retcon it. So
the best retconning is just to memory hole something. Right?
Yeah, and society's really good at that these days. That's awesome though that you worked on the RPG. I have like different RPGs that I still haven't tried out, like just small ones. But I only just do D&D mainly. But with the D6, when you were talking about that, what's the other one what's it called? shoot, I forget what it's called. But there's one you have like white dice and black dice when you roll them, but it's a bunch of D6. It'll come to me later. Nope. Okay. Whatever. But it just reminded me of that. So the different continents that you've lived in. So you've lived in 3 different ones. Oh, I'm sorry. I have an interruption here. We just got some new baby chicks.
Oh, okay. I guess that's an important interruption, actually.
Yeah. I can show the other one too. I'll hold it on camera. Hello. They're adorable. As a side note, we have 12 chickens, or we had 12 chickens, and one was killed yesterday or the night before. So I was really heartbroken yesterday. And then I'm like, well, let's get a replacement for them. So now we got these baby ones to help fill in the void. So
very cute.
Anyway, so you have lived in 3 different continents. They've been North America, South America, and I assume
Europe. Yeah.
And Europe. Okay. Oh, okay. So what got you traveling around so much?
Well, I was I always liked to travel. I've traveled since I was a kid, and basically after I finished university, and when I decided that I wasn't going to go on in a career in academia, I ended up working in a job that allowed me to work from anywhere. And so I said, well, if I can work from anywhere, then I'm going to be
go anywhere,
moving around, right?
Yeah.
And I did that, and I kept moving around. This was like more than 20 years ago now, right? But I went to a lot of different countries and a lot of different places, and ended up at one point being here in Uruguay in South America, and I liked it, and all the conditions were right, and so I decided to stay, and I've been here ever since, basically, give or take a bit.
Yeah, it must be nice there. I know someone in our community too. She lives in Honduras, I think, and just the pictures that I've seen, like, man, it seems so beautiful, and I want to travel more to more, especially tropical places.
Well, Uruguay and Honduras are pretty different from each other. Honduras is like in a jungle region, right? And and Uruguay is in what's called the Southern Cone, the tip of South America, and so it's very hot during the summer, but it can actually get relatively cold in the winter.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. Well, I'd visit it in the nicer times though, because I'm in Pennsylvania now, and after moving back from Chicago, and both of them have like really hot summers and really cold winters, and I'm not a winter fan.
Right now we're in autumn here, right? And for you Americans, it's 55 degrees Fahrenheit here right now, so it's not especially warm.
Do you use Celsius?
Yeah, we have Celsius. Okay. We're like the entire rest of the world is Celsius.
I know. Well, thank you for translating, because I really have no idea whenever I hear Celsius.
I did live in the U.S. too, so I do know. I know my Fahrenheit and my miles more or less.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I know nothing though. If you could tell me that it's like 20 degrees Celsius, like I have no. Is that cold? Is that hot? Like, we have Canadian friends that we lived near in Chicago, and I was just like, I don't even know what temperature your house is in right now, because like, what do I set your thermostat to? And then what was the third thing that you had, the transgender cover art?
That's right.
So then that was true too. So can you tell me about what the art was and how that came about?
I wrote an RPG called Arrows of Indra. This was in 2013, and it was actually one of my earlier products. Right, I'd only written a few. I had already written, what was it, 3 or 4 books before that one, but it was the first one that was really properly part of the OSR, the old school Renaissance. And what it was basically the classic Dungeons and Dragons rules adapted to be played in the world of epic Indian myth, like the myth from the Mahabharata. And it incorporated all of the elements of Indian mythology, of the story of, the war that happens in the Mahabharata, the kingdoms. It was, very well researched and all of that. It has details on all the, monsters and creatures and magic of Indian myth. and it had all the cultural aspects of the Indian world in that point in time, in what you call the Vedic period. And among that were things like the caste system and slavery and all of those sorts of things that were real things in history. And another thing that was a real part of history in the Vedic period and in many different periods in Indian society is that they have a concept of a third gender, right? Of a person that is neither male nor female, right? And so people call it transgender person. It's almost always that third gender, whether it's the what they call kliba or there's another term for it now that hijra. They're almost always born males but end up becoming females. They usually are eunuchs who then dress and live as females, but they're also considered different. Like they're not just treated absolutely like women. They're treated as sort of special. And in the Vedic period, that third gender type were associated with certain ritual elements that happened in the temples, and they were thought to have kind of a propensity for magic powers, for things like fortune tellings or blessings or curses. And so it's it was part of the culture. And of course, I was creating a historically or mythologically authentic game. So I wrote all about that. I included that. I did how you have to, what type of a player character you could have that was this third gender type, and decided to, include all that. So then when, I don't make my own covers. I've never self-published anything. I always work with a publisher. The publisher in this case was Bedrock Games. And Bedrock Games, when they're in charge, I just do the writing, right? They do all the art. All my publishers always take care of all the art, the layout, the editing, all the other stuff. I'm just a writer. So when it came to determining the cover art, they got a really good cover artist, Bedrock Games did. And the artist had some ideas. I wanted to make sure that the art had elements of authenticity to it and wasn't like just sort of like this kind of fake, American idea of what a Bollywood movie looks like type of cover art. So they consulted me on it. And one of the things that the person had was this kind of idea of having a group of adventurers fighting a demon at the entrance to a temple in a jungle. And I said, okay, that all sounds good. And then trying to remember. Yeah, there was some suggestions of like who did I want the heroes to be on the cover, and I remember I said I really wanted to be sure that there was an archer in it, and I think maybe that the publisher said that there should be one of the like non-human races in it. So there's these kind of like pseudo dwarves that exist in Indian mythology, and so we had one of those. And then there was, obviously it had to be some kind of a magic user, right? And so I said, well, why not use a character that is, one of the Kleba, one of the third gender people, right? And so they did that, and we never made a big deal about it, right? But it ended up, I ended up finding out after a lot of investigation, I discovered that it was the first time ever that there was a trans hero character on the cover of an RPG rulebook ever, right? So I was the one who put the first transgender character on the cover of an RPG. And again, I didn't make a big deal out of it until, the wokening started to happen, until like 2015, 2016. And now I love to bring it up with these assholes that want to like insinuate that I'm, a bigot or whatever, right. Or, that I'm transphobic or something like that,
Just point out,
yeah. How can you say that? I'm the first person that had the guts to put a trans character on the cover of an RPG,
Right.
But I didn't think of it in that way at the time. I just thought of it as, this would be an accurate depiction of the setting,
Yeah. And I remember reading about a lot of that culture and stuff too. Just a long time ago, so I only have vague memories, but that sounds awesome. And I think that's hilarious to be able to point that out to when you have all of like the woke people trying to say like, well, you know, you're awful for this and you're homophobic or bigot or whatever, white supremacist. They'll throw everything at you no matter what you are.
Yep.
I guess that can lead into a next part too, that can we get a little bit of your background, I guess, just generally, like how long have you been a gamer and how you got into writing and publishing different things too?
Yeah. So I've been gaming since the original old school period, since the mid 80s, basically, or, you know, the middle half of the mid 80s, I guess let's say,
Okay.
when I started in elementary school, which is how old I was back then. And, you know, like I guess it was grade 6, I think. Yeah. And it was, you know, back then the game was kind of still a fad, right? It was still something that was popular, which is kind of weird, right? When you think about it, that, you know, Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s and the 80s had reached a certain level of mainstream popularity and had a certain reputation of being kind of countercultural, right? Like when I started gaming, I was easily the nerdiest guy at my table, right? And everybody else who was playing were like heavy metal guys or like skaters, you know, like they were all like these counterculture players that were like, yeah, you know, the D&D is awesome because it's got, you know, naked succubus images on the DMG, you know, and you can do like demon summoning magic, you know, like stuff like that, right? That was the reputation it had, right? And then by the time I was in high school, I was easily the least nerdy guy at the table, right? Because everybody else there was just a geek, right? It had become a geek thing and it remained that. And I've always said that we were way better off back when, you know, mothers were worried that their sons would become Satanists because they play D&D than, you know, what happened in the 90s and the 2000s when mothers were worried that their sons would still be living in their basement at the age of 30 because they play D&D, you know?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I didn't think about
I was
that
always
dynamic.
in favor of being part of the counterculture.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was just a regular gamer for a very long time, right? It was never, you know, I mean, of course, it was a childhood dream, you know, literally I can remember when I was, you know, 12 or 13 years old, this fantasy I had of you know, working at TSR at the time and writing Dungeons and Dragons and how incredible that would be, right? But I didn't take it seriously at that point, right? I ended up going to university. I gamed all through, you know, the 90s. I studied history and comparative religion, and at the same university that Jordan Peterson studied at, and Ezra Levant. So, that university has a lot to answer for, I think.
Yeah.
The University of Alberta. Anyway, and after that, you know, like when Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition came out, I was already living. No, I was still living. 99. I don't remember where I was living, but I wasn't in Uruguay yet. But a few years after that, I was, right. And when in the early 2000s, I had noticed that gaming culture was having this kind of interesting battle between people who wanted gaming to be a something fun and entertaining versus people who wanted gaming to be super serious stuff, right? And I ended up becoming a blogger on kind of the side against the story gamers, the people that wanted gaming to be like this super serious intellectual pursuit. And you know, I called myself the RPGPundit. I started a blog about that, and the blog was quite successful, and ended up writing a lot about kind of, because the thing is that the side that didn't like Dungeons and Dragons and that were the story gamers, they created these complex sort of intellectual theories of role playing, all of which were meant to argue that D&D sucks, right? And that the real game that people actually want to play, they're just too stupid to know it, are these like sophisticated story making games about degenerate university professors or gay boys or, lower class non-white girls having smoke breaks behind the McDonald's they work at, right? And that's the real gaming, and not Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, all these people 10, 15 years later would all become the SJWs in the gaming market, right? When they realized that nobody liked their stupid ideas, they took another shot at it by instead making it political instead of intellectual, which is really what all SJWism is. It's people who think they're very smart and are midwit educated at middling university level and think that because of that they should be more respected than they are, and so they want to use the stupid things they've learned as a way to get power and respect. But anyway, I was also university educated, probably better than they were, and so I decided to, recognizing their tactics, turn that around and produce coherent arguments that were in defense of gaming the way it is, and what gaming actually does. And along the way, trying to understand kind of the psychology of playing Dungeons and Dragons and what makes it work and what creates the peak experiences in Dungeons and Dragons play. And it turned out that the things that they were condemning about Dungeons and Dragons as being, incoherent are actually the things that I think are the essence of peak role playing, which is a couple of things that are called emulation and immersion. So emulation means that you have that you're playing in a world that ends up feeling real, right? The more real that the dungeon master can make the world feel to the player, the better the experience is going to be. And immersion, which requires emulation to happen, is where you as the player are playing your character and have played your character long enough and in a world that is real enough that the character starts becoming real also. And so then you have this immersive experience at which kind of I describe the peak moment of immersion being when you're playing your character and then suddenly you realize your character is going to do something that you didn't think up consciously. It just comes out of you. And it surprises you. Oh shit! I didn't know my character was going to do this, right? but it's because your character now has a life of its own, right? And that's the peak moment of immersion. So a lot of people have had that kind of experience, and you understand if you're a gamer that's played long enough, you understand that peak experience. So I was writing some kind of deep stuff on this blog, and ended up having a lot of game designers at the time, the ones that weren't kind of the proto SJWs, but other game designers reading that blog and commenting on it, sometimes debating about it and so on. One of the people who was a very frequent reader and commentator on that blog was a guy named Mike Merles. And Mike Merles at that time was just a very little known game designer who hadn't really worked on anything at first. And later he ended up writing a couple of D20 RPGs, like third-party RPGs, and collaborated a bit with Monty Cook. Monty Cook was one of the designers of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, so he was like making his way up in the world, right? But a couple of years later, Mike Merles ended up becoming the lead designer of Dungeons and Dragons for Wizards of the Coast.
Right.
And when he did that, he was eventually tasked with creating the 5th edition of D&D after 4th edition was an absolute disaster. And part of the reason why 4th edition was so bad was that it was based on some of these theories that these story gamers had of what was bad about D&D and how you could make a version of D&D that was less bad, right? But remember, these were all people that hated D&D, so you shouldn't take advice on how to fix D&D from someone who despises it, right? Whose first premise is that D&D is awful, right?
And they're not so that's make why 4th edition
was hated by so many people. I predicted at the time that 4th edition came out that they would lose that Wizards would lose almost exactly 2/3 of its market base from this edition. And when Mike Merles was put in charge of doing 5th edition, he sent me an email. And he said basically that that was correct, and so they wanted me to consult on 5th edition. And I consulted there. I worked with him. I was We had for months an exchange of hundreds of emails where we were developing concepts. Now, I didn't like literally, like I didn't write the description of a spell or something like that. I didn't write text. There were other people, the way Wizards works, it's a corporation, and you've got like the idea guys at the top tier. And then you have the directors of the creative teams. And then you have the supposed creative teams, which is actually ironic because they're not allowed to be creative at all, that are told what to write and then write, And
Very
so
limited.
those are the people like Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins who are the ones that are now kind of higher up and are pretending that they're, people of importance. But the big concepts of what is this game going to be like, and what's its structure going to be, and how are we going to make it as appealing as possible to as many people as possible, that was stuff that was conceived of in emails between myself and Mike Merles.
Right.
So after 5th edition came out, there was a lot of pushback from, this was in 2014 now, so this was the very early period of what you could call the SJW, the wokeness movement. But they immediately went on the attack. These people already hated me because I had been constantly attacking them and their ideas. And they jumped on, that I was somehow some kind of a bigot, a transphobe or whatever, all this sort of stuff. They attacked another consultant as well. The claims that they made were baseless about both of us. It actually, the whole controversy came to be called Consultant Gate. And it actually happened about 6 months before Gamergate happened.
Oh.
So this was the SJW crowd doing like a dress rehearsal.
Right,
for
that's what I was
would
going to say.
become
Yeah.
Gamergate.
Yeah.
And they failed because Wizards and Mike Merles stuck, to their guns on this and didn't listen to them. They were doing it because they hated the 5th edition and wanted to destroy it. They wanted it to be the controversy, to kill it at its very beginning. And then when that failed, their next plan became, well, then let's take over 5th edition. And that's essentially what they've done now. But anyways, out of being a consultant, I ended up becoming a bit better known, especially after Consultant Gate. I had already by then published Arrows of Indra, but then I started publishing other RPG products and just decided to go full time making RPGs. I'm one of maybe tabletop is not a very financially stable enterprise, right? But I'm I think one of maybe less than a dozen people for sure that makes a full time living writing RPG products. Almost no one can do that. That doesn't work for some kind of a corporation anyways.
Yeah.
So I'm a full-time independent RPG producer. And I've written hundreds of products, over 100 products since then, in many of which are PDF periodicals, but I've got, I think, how many have I got now? I've got at least a dozen physical products, I think. So big books and so on. I eventually went out of blogging and into YouTube, and my YouTube channel has become kind of a center pin for the OSR movement, which is the old school Renaissance design movement that I've become a big backer of in the last few years.
Yeah, can you? I'd like you to get more into describing the OSR in comparison to modern stuff too, if you're willing to do that. Real quick, I just want to say hello to people in chat.
Okay.
But just hi, Boston Josh, and yes, this is a D&D dress. Hi, Silverlock. It is disappointing that people only think that there's D&D. I remember the other game too. It's called Fortunes. That was the one that had a bunch of if you roll. I forget how it worked, but it was a lot of D6s. But
sorry, what was the game called?
I think it's called Fortunes. So if you've heard of that, yeah,
I've never heard of that. That's weird.
I've only played it once, but it's a lot more storytelling heavy. But you roll like a bunch of dice, and I forget what it was. Like if you get more sixes or something on the white dice or black dice, like good things would happen with the white dice, the bad stuff would happen with the black dice, and you just play into it. So when I kept having bad things happen to me, and so you just kind of go hard into like, okay, like how terrible can this next thing be? And it was a lot of fun, but I knew it would come to me eventually. But Silverlock, I know him in chat. He likes Savage Worlds, if you know that RPG. I'm playing that tonight, actually, with some friends.
Familiar with Savage Worlds. It's not one of my favorite games, but I mean, it's a perfectly good game. It's a lot of fun, you know.
And that one too, like I think what's interesting that it doesn't use D20 though. Like so they emphasize all the other polyhedral shapes.
Yeah.
So that's fun. What I guess real quick too, what's your favorite die type?
That's a good question. I'm not one of these people that has a lot of like superstitions about dice or anything like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is very appealing about RPGs is having unusual dice, right? Like a game. There are some RPGs that only use 6-sided dice, the regular, dice. But I always think that having the unusual dice is like a feature that is kind of special. But that said, I'm not sure that I have a particular one that I like more than others. I play one of the OSR games that is out there is a game called Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Yeah.
And Dungeon Crawl Classics is a game that uses some really weird dice because it has, for example, the 14-sided dice and the 16-sided dice and the 24-sided dice and the 30-sided dice, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I could say like one of the dice I really like is that, as in like specific dice that I really like, is a D24 that I got to play Dungeon Crawl Classics, just because it's so unusual, So, but it's not because I think it's special in some other way. It's just because it's, nobody, most gamers even haven't seen a 24-sided dice.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen like, the big D100s and or like D3s and all that too. Like, I think that's, and I love that I don't have any with me now, but I have like weird shaped ones that are like one's like a unicorn horn set.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, I'm addicted to dice. They call me a dice goblin. So, but I was wrong too, that the Fortunes, that's not the name of it. I'm trying to wait. It's let's see what the answer is. Fortunes was a game that my friend invented that has to do with tarot cards. So I still can't remember the name. I know the gameplay, but I just can't remember the game. And my boyfriend is not answering. So I'll let you know what that is. Someone said to do a poll in chat of favorite die type, but it only gives me 4 options too. So I don't even know. What 4 options should I give the people? What out of you tell me. So I'll say D12, D20. Should I throw in a D24?
Yeah, I guess.
D6 for lame. Okay, we'll do that. I've never done a poll before, so let's see if that works. Anyway, can you go into old school Renaissance or Renaissance, and how does that differ from the modern stuff that we play today?
Well, the old school Renaissance is a movement that started in the mid 2000s, around 2005, 2006. And it was originally, the reason that it existed was because by that time, it was really hard to get like the old editions of D&D. You could buy them used, right? But, this was, they were usually very expensive and so on. And there were a bunch of people who were still playing those old editions and were wanted to be able to have the rule books and wanted, there were still people that kind of wanted to make new adventures for those rules. And so the very beginnings of the OSR was people. You see, one of the things about role-playing games, you can't copyright game rules. So as long as you're not cutting and pasting, like if you're writing a set of rules that have all the same rules as Dungeons and Dragons, but you're not writing the same, you're not, copying the same text, you're writing it yourself, then you can basically copy all of the rules of the game in this new product, and it's legal, right? So people started taking these old editions, like for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, AD&D First Edition, the original Dungeons and Dragons box set, or the basic expert Dungeons and Dragons, which were, these were the different editions that existed in the 70s and 80s. And they were making games that were basically clones of those. They were the same rules, but just rewritten and given a new title. So there's a game called Labyrinth Lord that is a cloned copy of the old red box basic Dungeons and Dragons rules. And then there's another one called Osric, which is a clone of the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rules. And that's kind of how it started. Those books became popular because this was before you had mass printing and print on demand on PDF, right? It was only a few years before that, but that was still a way to go. And so it was ironically, the existence of print on demand meant that Wizards was going to re-release all these old books, and today you can buy them all with print on demand. So it kind of killed the idea of the clone, but it actually also made it much easier for people to publish independent products, including other old school products. And very quickly, even though at first, like the original OSR group were people that all they wanted to do was play the old games. They didn't want innovation. But pretty soon you had some people showing up and saying, well, what if we took these rules and changed them a bit? And then what if we changed them some more and then put in enough that it basically becomes a different version of Dungeons and Dragons than just being a copy of the old Dungeons and Dragons. One of the first people who did this was a guy named James Raggi, who wrote a game called Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is Dungeons and Dragons in like a copy of the old edition version of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's remade to be much more of a weird fantasy and sort of what does he call it? Grindhouse fantasy. That's what he calls it. Than a regular Dungeons and Dragons would. And what he did is he changed the rules to fit that method, right? So for example, wizards all have like summoning spell, but there is no like fireball or lightning bolt, right? And clerics can't raise the dead. So when you die, right? You have one shot, right? And the classes were made to have much more niche protection. So only fighters get better at fighting as they go along. Okay. All that, those sorts of changes, you make enough of those, it becomes a different game. And yet it's still Dungeons and Dragons. It's still classic Dungeons and Dragons. And this is what inspired what's called the second wave of the OSR movement, which was this realization that you can use the skeleton of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Like the most basic parts of the rules, as a framework for a design movement to make new and exciting games, innovative games that still fit within the structure. It has, like, the rule is that it has to still fit within the compatibility with Dungeons and Dragons. And that's a very interesting concept because it's a design school that has to paint within a box, right? And so within that box, though, you can make almost anything you want. And the framework, right, the restriction of saying, well, what you have to do has to still be compatible with the original D&D core, you know, the essence of what is D&D, forces people in certain ways to be more intelligently creative than if they were just told, well, make whatever game you want.
Whatever.
Mm-hmm. Most design movements were in role-playing games were kind of that, right? Like they were like, well, you know, like story gaming. Story gaming was a design movement that was based on you make your game as different from Dungeons and Dragons as possible and make sure it's pretentious, right? And it never produced a single worthwhile game. Whereas the OSR, what it did is it said, well, what's the essence of D&D? What are those most basic rules that define something as D&D? let's have that. That's the frame, and then you can remake it any way you want, right? So now there are literally hundreds of OSR products out there, and so that includes stuff like, for example, Arrows of Indra rewrites Dungeons and Dragons into a game that was designed not to be a kind of generic sword and sorcery 70s fantasy, but rather a game that was specifically made to play epic Indian mythological fantasy, right? And my other game, Lion and Dragon, people who look at the avatar here can see part of the cover of Lion and Dragon, is that's my best-selling product of all time, by the way. Lion and Dragon is a reimagining of D&D to say, hey, wait, what if D&D was done to actually be medieval fantasy? Because most people think, well, D&D is medieval fantasy, right? I mean, that's what D&D is, isn't it? But it's not. D&D is actually like a Renaissance fair TV movie sort of fantasy of like it doesn't replicate, for example, what medieval culture was like. It doesn't replicate the elements of religion and Christianity. It doesn't have the elements of how medieval people saw magic. The monsters are not medieval monsters. So I said, okay, what if we take Dungeons and Dragons and we make sure that it has like the social rules of the Middle Ages. It has, it's set to be played in a world that is basically the real medieval world. The magic is based on what medieval people thought magic worked like. The monsters are all based on what medieval sources have about real medieval monsters, right? As in real in the sense of how medieval people imagined the world, right? And so the end game is something that's a totally different experience than if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition or any of the editions has this kind of generic modern fantasy feel to it that can only barely be called medieval. It's only medieval in the slightest ways, right? Whereas Lion and Dragon, it plays like, the closest thing in modern fantasy to what Lion and Dragon plays like is sort of Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones has a bit more of that medieval styling to it, right? Like you could probably run a really good Game of Thrones campaign using Lion and Dragon.
Yeah.
But it's, it plays like as if you're role playing in the world of Shakespeare's War of the Roses saga, right? Like his medieval king sagas, right? So like it's that sort of interest in action. Or if you're, you can use it to play earlier medieval stuff too. So you could use it to play something Arthurian, for example. And that's only like kind of the milder end of the OSR. You've got, people have done like OSR games for playing commando raids during the Second World War, where, there's no magic. There's not, you're a commando, you're a special unit soldier fighting in World War II. There's really no limit to how creative you can get with the setting elements and how you modify the rules, as long as they stay within that compatibility to actually what sort of game you produce. Right now, we're doing, there's somebody on the chat here named Taylor Lane, who's a friend of mine, and Taylor is doing a game jam on itch.io, and I'm afraid I don't remember the address of it, but it's maybe Taylor will comment if they're still on here. The game jam that they're doing there is for people who want to like try their hand at making an RPG, and it's calling for RPGs that are 5,000 words or less. So it's a very short RPG, and the goal is make it as unusual as you possibly can while still being OSR compatible. Right? And so like those sorts of exercises are really interesting, because it leads people to make like some creative new mechanics that later on get kind of imitated and copied, right? The magic system in Lion and Dragon was inspired, not the spells, but the way you do magic roll. Like you don't, it's not like you memorize it in D&D. Instead, you roll a D20, you have to beat a number. And all of that came out of a mechanic that was in Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? Dungeon Crawl Classics borrowed stuff from other games too. Like, and because everything is compatible, all of these really clever people are making these games, and you can take all these different books and mash them all together, right? Stuff from one book can be easily transported to the other because it's all compatible with itself, and that's the big appeal of the OSR.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Because what I like with D&D is like being able to take like the skeleton, because we kind of do our own. Sometimes we're like, oh, we're gonna switch it up and just kind of make our own thing for a one shot, but then you're kind of using some like base mechanics or whatever. And then because my campaign that I have, my friends and I, or half of us, were improvisers in Chicago. So like we do a lot more like silly comedy based stuff when we do it too. But I like that 5e does kind of allow for, that's what we play though too, but it kind of allows for like, hey, we'll just take some of the essence of it and then make it our own thing. And I haven't really gotten as much like into other stuff as I'd like to though, but there's just so much out there. Yeah, I don't know whether or not how you would feel, like whether you'd think that like, oh, the way that I run my game is like, oh, this is good, or you'd be like, I hate it because I don't know I'm not very great at mechanics. I have like the other people know mechanics better than I do. So sometimes, and I do a lot of like, I like anime. So a lot of the stuff that I do is like, oh, inspired from what I've seen on shows and stuff. And I have like a full plot, but they kind of take it like where it's not pretentious. We do a lot of like jokes, a lot of bits, and those things kind of become canon within the storyline, and then we just kind of like build from there. But then they still play in a way that progresses the storyline, and they might like metagame, but in a helpful way to me too, where it's just like, we want to do this crazy thing, but we're gonna sit and wait on it before we actually do this, so that way like out of game I can prepare for the next session. So they're like really nice about it.
Well, first of all, I think that anybody who's actually role playing for the sake of role playing, right? If you're playing D&D or whatever role playing game because you like gaming, then I'm not going to criticize you about that, right? Because the only people, the only thing we care about is that you game, right? It's not, the people that are like, getting involved in gaming for other reasons, whether it's, political reasons or whatever, or as a social, because it's socially trendy or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing now,
right? But the people that are there because they want to game, they really enjoy gaming, then do whatever works for you, right? But second, I should point out that I'm usually the game master in my games, but I'm almost never the guy that best knows the rules in any group, right?
Yeah.
Even when I wrote the rules, I'm usually not the guy that knows them best. There's usually some fanboy in one of my gaming groups that says, hey, but remember you wrote here. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. So that's not a big impediment really,
Yeah,
but
that makes me feel
it's
better.
funny what you say about making your own thing with 5th edition. That one of the things that Mike Merles and I had really talked about when we were designing 5th edition, and that what we wanted it to be was a game that was easy to modify, right? We wanted to be specifically, what we were talking about was modularity, because the 3rd edition and the 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons were not easy to modify. They didn't have easy modularity, because if you tried to change a rule, there were a whole bunch of other things that were interconnected with that rule that if you changed it would then stop working the right way. And it made it really complicated. Whereas what we wanted to do was a system where it was very easy to make those modular changes so that every DM could make what he wants out of the game. And we had this kind of vision, this dream, that it would be like 1,000 points of light, right? Like that everybody who bought D&D would run the game their own way, and they'd make up their own version of it, or their own house rules. And some of them would publish about it or write about it on forums or whatever they were going to do. And that one of the things that would be like most popular about D&D 5th edition would be how easy it is to change. Right, and that never ended up happening. Instead, what happened is almost everybody became just these robots, and I don't know why, because if you look at the rules in the player's handbook, it's very clear how modular they are. If you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, we filled it with optional rules and that were meant to be an example of how easy it is to change how you use 5th edition, right? But instead of that, and I don't know what ended up really causing this, you ended up having everybody wanting to play D&D the same way. And in fact, this idea that you have to ask people in authority when there's some doubt about the rules, right? So people don't even like just work it out themselves. They end up going and asking Jeremy fucking Crawford about it, you know, in his advice column or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I maybe it helped me because like I'm still relatively new to it. Like I'd always wanted to play, and then and I never got the chance to. So like 5th edition is the first edition that I had ever played. So like that's the only one that I know. And when I started DMing, I started with, what were we trying? I think it was Princes of the Apocalypse. I tried to do that module, and it was a lot of like, if you're doing this, jump to chapter 6, and then if you do this thing, jump to chapter 3. And so it was like, okay, I have to know everything that's going on first, and it was daunting. So eventually, after like one session, I was like, nope, I'm scrapping this. It's a lot easier for me to keep track of my own world. So it's just like, hey, you're transferring over to this world, and then like I had like it's all in my head, and so like I understand like the NPCs and what they want to do way more because it's just coming from me, and rather than having to like read through it. So it was a lot easier for me to kind of start that, and the harder part too was learning how to let the players have like their agency, because I would see things like, here's the cut screen that were like, you guys get trapped, you know, like you're fighting on a ship, but you get captured. And so then like, why are you guys like trying to fight this? Like, no, just let yourselves be captured. And then I would like force it and kind of railroad, and like, this feels awful. And so eventually like afterward, I'm like, okay, I had to learn how to like, no, let them all try, let them do stuff, like be open to like anything can happen. And then doing more improv and stuff helped me with that too, just as far as like, okay, I have like, this is what the NPCs are trying to accomplish, what the characters end up doing, like who knows, and like that'll affect the world, and then just kind of building from there. So there was some growing pains, but eventually I think I got a lot looser as far as like, you guys can try whatever you want to do, and then like whether or not you can succeed at it like is a different story, like, or if it's gonna like, you know, totally fall on your face. But yeah, like it was fun to like learn and get more experience with it. So the campaign that I've been doing has been going on for like 3.5 years now.
Right.
And I don't know, it's a lot of fun. I'm kind of getting a little burnt out because we do it weekly, but so that they're like so close. They're getting so close to the end. I finally like revealed some like bigger plot stuff, and so like they're really wanting to play. But we also do like filler sessions too for holidays. So like, oh, here's the April Fool's one, or here's the Easter special and stuff. So we do that. So we're cutting in between now. And they're like, we just want to get back to like the main plot and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you went through this whole kind of arc of going from being a newbie GM to starting to understand the concepts of emulation, which is what I was talking about earlier, right? Like how to make the world a living world, you know?
Yeah, and I know from like the players even telling me later too, how like they like that the stuff that they do like affects the world then later on, and it makes me excited because there's stuff that I'm like, I never expected this to happen, or like I added in like big plot stuff just because they wanted to go do one thing, and then here's this like small NPC, and then they keep like starting businesses too, so or like they got sponsored by like this jewelry, like they saved a couple girls who like sell jewelry, and like, hey, do you want to sponsor us? So now like they advertise for the company. So it's just like a lot of they're really entrepreneurial, even though they're actually like more on the SJW side of things though, because they're like liberals in Chicago, but we don't do politics much. But so like they like socialism, but they really love starting their own businesses. Like they have several of them in my campaign. I'm like, I'm gonna let you do it because I want you to kind of learn. But so then they even invented like the train system, like they invented trains. So like, yeah, I'll let that go. And like, yeah, you're the creator of the railways. So we have that. But Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to get into it. And I'm glad that I finally did. Again, like I didn't get into it until I was like 22, once I started dating my boyfriend, and he was like the first person that I knew. I'm like, oh, you've actually played. Can you teach my friends and me how to do this? I had a D&D starter box for years and we just never like played it. That was like, he ran it and I'm like, this is a lot of fun. How come we never did this before?
That's great. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, in my on my YouTube channel, one of the things, I mean, a lot of my YouTube videos are basically talking about the politics of the games hobby, right? But I've divided my channel into different playlists, and one of those playlists, which it's got to have like 50 videos by now. My YouTube, by the way, is RPGPundit, or Kasimir Urbanski RPGPundit. I don't know if you're going to have the link in the description later.
Yeah, I'll even put it in chat too. But yeah, I'll put everything. One of
the playlists that I have there is called D&D Things They Taught You Wrong on Purpose, and that's basically us videos that are meant for people who are relatively newer to the hobby, about kind of how to play RPGs and how to run RPGs. And it focuses on breaking notions of sometimes very commonly held notions that relatively new gamers have, about, because somebody at some point told them, about how to run a game that's actually wrong, that you shouldn't be doing, right? Like, for example, the gameplay has to be balanced, right? That's a very common piece of advice that's completely wrong.
I'm so glad that you say that, because there's so much imbalanced in mine.
Or player characters should have complex backstories. No, that's also wrong. Your player characters become real not because you create like some elaborate backstory for them. You have to play them, and then they'll become real as you go along.
And that's definitely happened. Yeah, I love that.
Or even stuff like, players should all have equal play time. That's not necessarily true. There are some, because in any gaming group, think about this, right? There's going to be some players that want to be always on, and then there are some that are really not. They don't necessarily want to be in the spotlight all the time, right? So you do have to kind of, the ones that want to always be the guy in charge, or the person doing the thing right now, sometimes you have to slow that person down and give other people a chance, right? But you also don't necessarily want the person who is comfortable being kind of the backup, right? You don't want to force them to have as much time as the person that wants to be the prima donna, right? So you've got to know your player, right? The idea, everybody gets equal time. No, that's wrong. So there's just a lot of stuff like this that is just D&D training for dungeon masters, especially.
Yeah, because I think
it's kind of missing these days, so.
Yeah, I like that concept of the equal, like not giving them equal, but it's just like give them the room to shine in how they play. So then just kind of, and what you were saying earlier too about like having the immersion and like, oh, I'm reacting this way despite, or like, oh, I wasn't really thinking about it. This is just kind of your automatic reaction as far as how the character would react. And that, I think that happened again. We had just like the silly, as the April Fool's Easter session. So I had them, they were like in a ride where they had like little laser light guns. But it was like got super dark, and the one it was pitch black, and the one character has a fear of dark and loves light, like he's a light cleric, and so he just kept shooting himself in the eye with the light. But it was just like the dumbest thing though, and they're like, why are you doing that? And he's like, oh, because it gives me it's light for a second. But it was just like, yeah, he's gonna do like these stupid things because that's just who he is. Before I want to get more into I guess like your experiences with wokeism and all of that, like in the RPG life. But first I want to do a quick would you rather game.
Okay.
And so I think I have them all kind of based off of RPG stuff. So, okay. There are going to be 3 questions. And I'll give you, and you're allowed to ask any follow-up questions if you want to, but you can interpret these however you want. So question number 1, would you rather be a game master or a player? And I know you said that you mostly GM everything, but if you had the choice.
Oh, I definitely game master.
Really? So you're fine with always having to tell a story and not getting the chance?
No, hang on now. The game master does not tell a story, at least not when he's doing it right.
Oh, that's true. That's fair. That's fair.
The game master creates a living world. That's what the game master has to do. Right? So the game master isn't an author. The game master is God. That's what, and he's supposed to be a clockwork God, right?
Always say
not
God.
an interventionist God. He's neutral. But I like creating worlds, which is part of why I guess I became a writer too. So that's something I enjoy a lot more. I can definitely have fun playing, but I always have more fun DMing.
Yeah, I'm not sure which I'd choose, because I do like getting the chance to play, but like the same thing, like again, when I got to build the world and have like, oh, here's what I'm like picturing in my head, and now I have other people getting to explore this world, and that they're helping build too, because then we're getting to build it together. Like it's a lot of fun. And I guess too, getting to play all the different NPCs, they like to troll me sometimes, because they'll like, hey, here's this party or wherever we're at that has like all the different NPCs that we come, so they make me have to talk. Hello.
Sorry, it looks like we got cut off there for a moment there.
Oh, did you? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. I probably missed the last things you said though.
Oh, I already forget what I said. Oh, I think I was just saying that I just like to be able to get to build the world and with them together. So I do love being able to like run all that and playing the different NPCs, because when you're just a player, you only get to play one character, but as the like when you get to GM, then you're all a bunch of different characters. So I get to like get into other personalities. So you choose game master. Okay. Oh, I never give you points for the first game either. So you get 5 points for your 2 truths and a lie. So you're on the board with 5 points. I'm going to give you another point for this would you rather.
All right. It sounds like you're making this up as you go along.
Never. I would never do that. Question 2. Would you rather be an unintelligent wizard or a physically weak barbarian?
Oh, that's an interesting choice. Well, I'm one of my longest running campaigns is my World of the Last Sun campaign, which is kind of like the opposite of what I was talking about with Lion and Dragon, right? Lion and Dragon is super, not realistic, but super authentic medieval setting game, right? And World of the Last Sun is a setting that is for gonzo role-playing, right? Like it's post-apocalyptic magic, high-tech, low-tech, everything in between, with like talking animals and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? It's a crazy high fantasy setting that is the campaign of it that inspired that book is still going on today. And the main protagonist, I guess, of that campaign, the player, there's only one player out of all of the players who is still playing the first character he played, and he's been playing it the entire campaign. So almost 10 years now where he's been playing the same character.
Wow.
And that character's name is Bill the Elf. And Bill the Elf is incredibly dumb, right? I think he's got like a 6 or a 5 intelligence. So he's an extremely dumb spellcaster, and yet somehow has managed, and he plays him as a stupid man, right? He plays the character as someone who's just not that bright either. But he somehow managed to stumble his way around, causing all kinds of chaos in that world, and now he's become famous, sort of, both inside that world in the campaign, and people who watch my YouTube channel know a bit about Bill the Elf, and the people in the OSR have heard that name. So I guess I would say a stupid wizard.
Okay.
It seems to work, actually.
Yeah, I guess go with what works. That's fine. I'll give you another point for that answer. You chose correctly. Then we'll move on to question 3, final question. Would you rather be known for creating the most popular RPG in the world, or actually live in a fantasy setting with magic and dragons, etc.? So then it wouldn't be fantasy, it'd be reality.
Oh. Well, you know, when you think about most fantasy settings, they're pretty shitty places to live in, aren't they? I mean, you could say, "Oh yeah, no, it's wonderful and whatever." But so wouldn't it be exciting? It's like people are like, "Oh, wouldn't it be exciting to live in the Middle Ages?" No, trust me, I'm a historian. There is no time in all of human history that it was better to live in than it is to live in 21st century Western civilization. It's the very best, you know. So, like, unless you're saying, can you live in the future where it'll be even better? Maybe it'll be better in the future, but there's no time in the past when it's better. And just because there's, you know, magic around, you know, like if you've got to worry about hordes of orcs coming and, you know, conquering your kingdom or dark hordes or shit like that. You know, so I think being a historian and knowing how these things really are, I would probably say that unless I was like, you know, had godlike powers in a fantasy setting, you know, then maybe. Yeah. But if I wasn't up there at the very top of the 1% of the most powerful people in the game world, I really wouldn't want to live in almost any game world, right? So I think I would rather be the most famous game designer.
Yes, that's totally fair. What a great answer to that too, just because like, yeah, that's how I feel. I need bathrooms, like indoor plumbing and all that. Like, I don't know, just would I trade that for the ability for magic? I guess if I could fly, I really have always wanted the power of flying. But I don't think so. I think I'd rather just live in modern times and just play it on a tabletop game. So totally great answer. You'll get another point for that one. I think that's a total of 8 points so far. You are in the lead of this game.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
And I forgot to mention that game that I misremembered before. It's called Fiasco. If you've heard that one, of that game, that name might be more.
Yeah, I've heard of Fiasco.
Okay, so that's the one. So I only played that once, but yeah, it was interesting.
It's not really a role-playing game, is it?
No, I mean, yeah.
It's something that incorporates role-playing game elements, but it's meant to be for something else. First of all, it's mostly a party game, right? But it's also
yeah. That's how I'd see it more. Yeah, it's it's a little bit of a storytelling.
It doesn't quite fit it's more of a storytelling game than it is a role-playing game. But
yeah. And I guess like from like a storytelling perspective, like the group that we did, like it worked well for it. And just like it's the game that I know of where I'm like, oh, I'm rolling a bunch of D6 though. So that's why it reminded me. And so in a different aspect, like rather than it being an RPG, it was a fun storytelling game.
Yeah.
Okay. So to get into, you've had to deal with the wokeness and the SJWs in the RPG community and all that. Like, I guess have they been trying to cancel you in different ways, or like what's been your like specific experience?
I mean, like I said, when you asked for my kind of story in the history of gaming, I've been fighting with a lot of these people since before anybody had ever heard of the term SJW. Right? I've been like fighting these same pretentious, controlling pseudo progressives from like 2006.
Onward. That's amazing. I mean, it's like surprising in a not surprising way that it was existing this long, but I was slow to like really notice how bad it was until like 2016.
Yeah, well, the role-playing game hobby has had elements of that going on since the mid 2000s, because even though the main arguments that they were making back then were about like these game theory ideas and story gaming, they always also included kind of fashionable left-wing concepts in that. And especially in like a lot of the forums that existed at that time, this was before social media was really huge. And so what you had were these internet forums where people would chat on these discussion lists, about role-playing games. Mm-hmm. And in the biggest one at that time, it was kind of taken over by this cabal of progressives who started banning people gradually more and more for having not left-wing opinions, and expressing them. So this became increasingly a problem, and really, this was a problem by 2006, 2007, because that was when I opened the RPG site, which is the www.therpgsite.com, which is an internet forum, still exists today, for discussing RPGs that was based on free speech. And the reason I did that was because the number one forum at that time had been completely subverted and was banning people who were making posts that were, in any way critical of leftist ideas. So it was something that even existed on the political level from as early as 2006, 2007. But they really ramped it up around 2014, which coincided with when 5th edition came out, And the first really huge, there was a couple of smaller incidents before that with a few games that were these really controversial games that everybody agreed had some element of controversy that progressive leftists tried very hard to ban, right? And then you also had some incidences of people publishing blogs on RPGs and stuff that were talking about how, the hobby is full of toxic misogyny, and then there was already a lot of this kind of feminism in RPG stuff that was the popular thing at the time. Nowadays, ironically, you never hear about feminism exactly in RPGs because it's all about, race and gender instead of feminism, because, they can't even define woman anymore. So right, yeah. How are they gonna talk about the treatment of women in RPGs? But the consultant gate was really one of the big moments, because they essentially were trying to have me canceled, right? Me and Zach and Mike Merles, for that matter. They wanted to cancel all of us. And then from that time onwards, because right around that same time, there were some other people, James Raggi, who I mentioned earlier, wrote Lamentations of the Flame Princess. He's a very pro-free speech, and he likes making game products that are, really edgy, right? Grindhouse is his style, right? And so he's made some games that are really, really meant to be as offensive as possible, But mostly not political. It's mostly gross shit, right? But in any case, people have tried canceling him, and there are other people, James Desboroughs, who wrote, he wrote a Gamergate card game, and but he also mostly writes RPG products. I hope I'm not misremembering this about James, but I'm pretty sure that was it. And they successfully got that banned from Drive-Thru-RPG, which is the main RPG independent publishing venue, right? Where people where small press RPG products are put up for sale, and it's the main marketplace for that outside of Amazon. A very important part of any RPG publisher's works. Zach Smith was later involved in some controversy because of accusations of sexual harassment. And I'm not going to say whether those accusations were accurate or not. We don't know, but people have been trying to cancel him since 5th edition came out, probably since before that. Again, mostly because he was this edgy guy on the internet, right? And basically after those allegations came out, that was it. He got a lifetime ban at Drive-Thru-RPG from any of his products, and people who had published him, including James Raggi, were trying to be forced to publicly disavow him, and you've seen many of these sorts of incidents that have happened from 2014 until today. Also people being harassed in direct means, doxing, harassed in their workplace, trying to get get them fired, things like that. Famously, Jeremy Hambly from The Quartering, he was physically assaulted at just outside Gen Con, the largest RPG gaming convention.
Right.
And Gen Con's response to that was to ban Jeremy Hambly from Gen Con.
When did that happen?
That happened a couple of years ago. It was 2019, 18? I don't remember which of the two.
Oh, I might have been there.
19, yeah. So Jeremy was out there having dinner, just at one of the restaurants right next to where the convention was. Mm-hmm. And this guy named, calls himself Matt Fantastic, who's a rampant SJW, walks up, asks him, "Oh, are you The Quartering?" And Jeremy says, "Yes." And then the guy just starts wailing on Jeremy. Jeremy never throws a punch. He tries to back away. Some people get between them. The guy is shouting, "I'm going to fucking kill you. I'm going to fucking kill you." Right. And they have to force him out of the bar. Jeremy had physical damage, right? Like bruises and stuff. And then when this was all brought up with Gen Con said, "Oh, well, but Jeremy Hambly is a hate speech harasser, and so we're going to ban him for life from Gen Con," which is, that's the problem. And Wizards of the Coast itself, of course, has been taken over by this entryism that we see all over corporate politics, of these people getting into these positions of middle management and of control of the public image and of media relations, where they're all trained in SJW tactics, right? They've all been indoctrinated in the leftist progressive model of deconstructionism, and are determined to actually take over, to basically wreck the things they're taking over. It's intentional. It's not that they're accidentally doing this. That's the goal. The goal is to destabilize Western culture.
Right. They want to destroy. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're and you see this in the latest products, right? Like the 5th edition basic rules are really good, and that's managed to keep the game relatively popular. But there are, I've been told that the last several books, which have each become progressive, because Mike Merles was kind of holding the fort there for a long time. He was still the boss. And as long as he was the top guy at Wizards, there was limits to what these people could do. But then he got ousted. And now for the last few months, we've been seeing basically everything after Candlekeep Mysteries onwards is stuff that is after Mike Merles. And you can see that every book that has come out from there onwards has been progressively more leftist, more openly about promoting these SJW ideas, and about distancing itself from the kind of the traditional elements of Dungeons and Dragons, right? Mm-hmm. So these products are still selling relatively well, but less than they had been before. And we're seeing, especially the last couple of books had good initial sales, but then they're not doing as well after the initial sales. So people are buying them and then not recommending them to other people. So you're going to, I think, be seeing a further downturn that will be happening with future products, because they're going to just keep trying to make it more and more woke and less about actually gaming.
Are they doing a 6th? Are they planning on coming out with a 6th one, a 6th edition?
Well, that's a very interesting question. What they've said is that in 2024, which will be the 50th anniversary.
Oh wow!
Is it 2020?
74?
Yeah, I think so. The 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay.
They're going to come out with a revised edition of D&D, but they haven't said it's a new edition. What they've claimed is that it'll be really close to what D&D is now, right? And I think that what that means is they've realized that these rules are very popular. They don't want to try to change them, because that could, and they don't really care that much about the rules, because they never play it anyways, right? But, they don't see any point in changing the rules themselves. What they're going to do is they're going to rework everything around the rules, right? So they've already said some of the things that they're going to do, right? For example, there won't be alignment anymore, because the idea that something can be good or evil is hate speech, right? They're going to probably add huge sections on gender, right? There aren't going to be races anymore. It's just ancestries, right? And every ancestry has to be completely open, right? Like, it doesn't, they're all just going to be gray blob people, basically, because there's nothing specific about being an elf or a dwarf or an orc that you can't have with anybody else, right? Like, the idea that you know, orcs are strong, or dwarves are tough, or elves are fast, or good at magic, and others are bad at magic. That's all racism, because to them, orcs are black people, right? This is how unbelievably racist these people are. You know?
That they come out and say that, and
they're going to change all of that, right? They're going to make everything around the rules be altered. They're going to probably change a bunch of the spell descriptions. They're going to probably add some stuff in that'll have more elements of wokeism. Maybe they're going to try to figure out a way to change the reward system of D&D from being, you know, to be like, in some way more penalizing of doing combat or something like that, and more rewarding of doing, you know, stuff that is theatrical or something along those lines, because that's what they think D&D should be, is a bunch of people, you know, having exciting talks in the coffee shop, right? And I wish that was an exaggeration, but literally the adventure module for the Strixhaven book is where you're an employee at a barista at a coffee shop. You know, like, that's literally an official D&D product. You know, so that's what they want D&D to become, right? And I think that's the way that they're going to change it. They're going to kind of keep the basic rules, but they're just going to mangle everything around it into this hipster woke garbage.
Yeah, and it just seems it's unnecessary to throw it in, because, like you said too, like, one thing I forgot to say earlier was, with 5th edition, one thing that helped me with starting to DM was seeing, or like figuring out how to DM, was in the player's handbook, where it talks about how, like, these rules and everything, it's, you know, there's suggestions, and like, it's, you know, the DM has final say on the world that you're building and creating. And then my boyfriend had to keep reminding me of that too, though, because it was just like, well, how do I do this thing, or how, like, what am I supposed to do here? And it's just like, it's your game. So then you can you know, change it to how, like, you want to do it. So rather than having to, like, structure more rules to say, like, this is how you have to play, like, no races, no whatever, I'm like, well, like, you can do that in your own game on an individual campaign. If, like, you want to let your characters try to be a little bit different for an elf or whatever, like, okay, like, that's just between you and your DM. And I think one thing that maybe I know the last time I had talked about it, like, people got upset with me, was that, like, alignment, like, I'm fine with players. My thing, though, and I understand, like, the lore for all of the other different, like, creatures and stuff too, but with my own campaign, I kind of, like, threw those out and had, because it's my own world, my own setting. So for me, like, coming from, like, the individualism, I thought, like, well, any creature that has an intelligence enough to, like, be able to choose, like, right and wrong and stuff, like, I didn't want them to, like, you're born inherently of one alignment or another. So I just kind of let them, like, oh, there can be good goblins, there can be bad, you know, high elves or whatever. But I know people really hold on to, like, the lore, and, like, that's totally fine too. Like, you do you, like, in your campaign. It's just like, I just didn't want to use the same history that they had in my own.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
But before I do, hello to Delaros. I didn't realize that you had him on here, but cool.
Oh, nice, yeah. Oh, you know. Yeah. Hi, John.
Is he an administrator? Okay. All right.
Yeah. I got a stream on his channel lately.
Excellent. All right. So what you're saying depends on the type of world that you want to make, right? Yeah. Because if what you're creating is a setting that is meant to be in some ways emulative of a contemporaneous world, or that it is something that is meant to be the kind of picaresque sort of style of being a like what we would nowadays call gonzo, or the kind of, oh my God, so random style of gaming, right? If you're trying to do, for example, I don't know, Adventure Time, the role-playing game, which is perfectly a legitimate thing to do, right? Like you could totally do that. Then it makes sense to not really have alignments, right? If you're going into that kind of modernist and postmodernist perspective. Now, if what you want is for your D&D game to emulate myth and legend, then that's different. Then you need to have structure of alignment, because what you're doing, you're playing in a world that is allegorical, right? That an orc is not a black person, right? An orc is a living embodiment of sin, of the corruption of sin. That's what the orc in Tolkien was meant to be, right? Tolkien took the basic Western European pagan heroic legend, right? The basic Western European myth, and reinvented it with a Catholic framework. That's what he did when he created Lord of the Rings, right? And so the orcs there become a representation of the embodiment of sin. Just like in Dragonlance, for example, which is a book that they've now announced they're going to come out with the new Dragonlance source book in 5th edition, and they're going to completely mangle it because of things like this, because they now say you can't have alignment anymore. Dragonlance has to have alignment, because Dragonlance is similarly that pagan Western European myth story reinvented through a Mormon lens, you know? And so
I didn't know that.
Because the people that wrote it, Tracy Hickman and I believe Margaret Weiss at the time, were Mormons, right? And it's basically the Joseph Smith story in a epic fantasy version. You know? It's very funny when you think about that, but it's true. And so like what you need to have, that the fact that creatures are embodiments of evil. Also, if you're playing in a historic mythical context, right? So in Lion and Dragon, for example, you can only play a human as a player character, right? Everything else, everything non-human, is this weird alien thing. And they're all kind of meant to represent different moral values and concepts, because that's what medieval people thought monsters and creatures and even normal animals were, right? Like medieval people, you look at medieval texts where they talk about like rocks and trees and birds, and all of those are like God created this creature to represent forgiveness, or this other creature to represent sloth, right? Like that's the medieval mindset. If you want to play in the medieval world, you've got to have that same mindset where non-human creatures are messages from God about, you know, moral lessons. And it's similar like in other mythological contexts, right? Like in Indian myth, the morality is going to be a little bit different, not very different, because all human morality is the same fundamentally. Most human societies are based on a largely common moral framework that has been evolving over time, but that is grounded in the same common human experience. And so some of the monsters are going to be a little bit different. Some of the things they're meant to represent are a little bit different. But again, you have to have a moral structure. You have to have what defines an alignment might be slightly different, but you have to have alignments, right? Where you don't have to have alignments is when you're playing in a system, in a setting that either because of when it is set, right? Like if you're playing in the modern 20th century in a role-playing game, or the 21st century, where you're playing in a 21st century game, you might not need to have alignment there, right? Or if you're playing in a fantasy world, but that basically has 20th and 21st century values, then you don't need to have alignment, because modernism is where that concept that you're talking about of individualism, where it first emerged, and where there suddenly you see, you know, what Nietzsche calls the death of God, right? That suddenly this enchanted world where everything is meant to be symbolic disappears, right? And it's kind of sad that it did, but that's one of the key differences of how you're playing your game. So when you're designing, when you're going to start to DM a new campaign, you got to think about what is this campaign meant to be? What is it meant to represent in the world? How does this world work? And then you have to make decisions about stuff like alignment based on the answers to those questions, right? There are some games where you must have alignment. There are some games where you shouldn't. The real problem with 5th edition now, and with the people running 5th edition now, is precisely that they want that they don't believe in doing that. They think that every setting has to be essentially a shipping of 21st century Seattle, right? 21st century upper middle class leftist progressive Seattle values. It doesn't matter if you're in the medieval world, if you're in Dark Sun, if you're in Dragonlance or Greyhawk, Waterdeep has to be like Seattle, right? And Ravenloft has to be like Seattle, right? So even in Ravenloft, good and evil can't be pure good and evil, and you also will have dark lords that are not necessarily bad, and of course you also have pride parades happening through the streets of Barovia. All of this sort of nonsense, right? And what it does is it basically tries to force people that the only thing you can do with role-playing games is have them as a postmodern allegory, which is a vehicle for political propaganda. That's what they're doing and why it's such a problem.
Yeah, I really like that, all of that, because I'm just kind of explaining more of the reasons why it makes sense to have the alignments and things. And you're right though too, because I'm like, when I was constructing my own world, I'm just not figuring it out, and it was easier. Hey, I'm just going to go with here's where my perspective on a lot of stuff. So I'm going to make this world so it is 21st century ideas I kind of picture it. It's not in the past. It's kind of if I guess I don't know, maybe not in medieval times. So it's kind of in that, but in a sort of present day, if technology and stuff didn't happen, it was more magic based. So I said, there is indoor plumbing but it's used with magic. The wizards are do something where it's just
so it's kind of a modern world, but grounded on magical principles.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's why but it's old enough where it's trains didn't exist yet, but now they do. So you're kind of in a sort of industrial-ish. So it's just kind of a mesh of different things. And again, coming from the improv, it was kind of I'm just gonna kind of let some of the worlds what they say and let it build up. And because my biggest thing is just are we having fun? We're people who used to sit at a table, but now we play remotely after the coof, and then we moved out of the city, so we just play online now. But it used to be hey, we're sitting on a table, is everyone having fun? If I want to I'll play into how they want to do it. And then again, also coming from the liking anime, it's well, and even the Adventure Time kind of thing too, I'd play that RPG.
Well, Adventure Time was a major inspiration, along with Rick and Morty and stuff like that, for my Last Sun setting, which is another book, really? World of Last Sun, that I've got. It was that, and it was just that whole style. And so I'm not saying every game has to be an epic representation of myth with a moral story, right? I'm saying you have to think about what you're making and then play it appropriately. Yeah. So in the Last Sun setting, for example, we don't really, alignment is very, very fluid, right? And we have a different alignment axis. In D&D, you have good, neutral, evil, and lawful, neutral, chaotic, right? Mm-hmm. So you could be lawful good or chaotic evil or chaotic neutral or whatever, right? In the Last Sun setting, you have law, neutrality, and chaos, which are big things, right? That are very important in the setting. Then the other three alignments are actually Boy Scout, freak, and asshole, right? So Bill the Elf is a chaotic asshole, right? Somebody else might be a neutral freak, right? And this has become just something we've done in the campaign because it's actually a better grouping of types of people in this really weird setting, right? Where almost everybody is either kind of this Boy Scout type person or this freak type of person or an asshole, and then, within the confines of whether they're doing it lawfully, neutrally, or chaotically. So, you can play around with those sorts of things. You just have to think about what it is what the consequences of that are for the world, or vice versa. You look at the world first, and then you work out what would be the right way to present these ephemeral concepts.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. So I really like you kind of explaining like, so that makes me feel better too, where just like, yeah, it depends on like, are you playing into the whole myth thing? Like, is that setting, is that world? And like, oh, am I doing it wrong if I'm not doing all that? But like, oh, it's just like I have a different vision of like how the setting is. Especially that's why I'm like, I'm just going to make my own. Oh, also, thank you, Silverlock, for the super chat, for a good show. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Quick question. Have you heard of SRPG, as in like the strategy or tactical RPG?
I don't think I have, actually.
There's a guy on YouTube, and I've seen a few of his videos, and he's how I learned it. His name is Harvester of Eyes, I think. It's a small channel, but he kind of talks about that. And I'm still kind of confused about it. So I just didn't know if you, I think it's something about like where you're like combining like tactical like strategy games with RPGs, so it's somehow like meshed together, and I'm still not super clear because I think it's like a sort of video game genre, but I don't know if it's also like tabletop. but if you're interested in that, you can check him out, Harvester of Eyes. But I just didn't know if that was something along your lines.
Well, I'm kind of a bit strange in that I don't actually play any video games, you know. Like,
okay.
I play.
I don't think it's that strange.
I have a Dominoes app on my phone, and that's like literally the only game, you know? So like that's kind of it. Played Candy Crush on my last phone, and that was like, that's the only thing. I don't play any video games. I play RPGs. Now, RPGs, the history of RPGs is that they're descended from war games, right? Like there were these miniature war games that people played in the 60s and the 70s that at first were like, well, we're recreating the Battle of Gettysburg with, you know, little miniatures and using these complex rules to simulate these battles, right? And then eventually people start getting more creative with them, and they start, you know, around the time that Lord of the Rings got really popular in the late 60s, some people said, well, what about if we have like battles of fantasy creatures, right? And they started doing that sort of thing. And then the original Dungeons and Dragons, it came out of a group of people that had been playing these tactical combat war games with fantasy armies and started like making more complex campaigns of these war games where they were set in a specific world and had like kings fighting each other and stuff, and stories about like great heroes and, you know, generals and things like that. And so suddenly you start having hero characters in these war games, and they made special rules for like specific heroes that could be in a battle, you know, which was reflective of fantasy literature. And out of that, they started designing this idea of a game where instead of fighting in big, large-scale war battles, you could have just like heroes going on adventures, and the dungeon became the format instead of the battlefield. And that's where Dungeons and Dragons came out of. Yeah. So all of this, when video games started to become more sophisticated, like beyond the Pong and Pac-Man level, you ended up having video games steal enormous amounts of stuff, both in terms of like rule design and concepts from both wargaming, traditional wargaming, and role-playing games, right? Like, I mean, a lot of the RPGs today are you know, computer RPGs today, I mean, are directly derived from Dungeons and Dragons. And a lot of the battle RPGs today, or battle computer games today, are directly derived from some of the tactical tabletop war games that were played in the 70s and 80s. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone that's now like trying to like turn this around and do it the other way. You know, like I know that there are some people in the gaming world that have been like incorporating, like they've been going back to chainmail. Chainmail was the set of war game rules that Gary Gygax invented, and Dungeons and Dragons emerged out of chainmail, right? But chainmail was not a role-playing game. It was a set of rules for running miniature combat in like fantasy battles, right? So I know that there are people now that are like going back and incorporating the chainmail rules in their fantasy campaign. So they'll be like you're playing D&D, but you have like high-level D&D, your characters have armies and stuff like that, and then you play the battles with those armies using chainmail and that sort of thing, you know, or using other combat games. So, you know, I don't know if that's what you were referring to, but that's the only thing I've heard about it.
Oh no, and I'm not sure either because I keep forgetting. I'm like, oh, is it just in the video game, or is he like, yeah, is it trying to cross over somehow? But yeah, so like I'm not super familiar myself. So
if it's video games, I'm the wrong person to ask.
Yeah, that's fair. Going back to when you were saying how like people aren't really buying books or with all the woke stuff happening, that's something that like I know that we stopped buying any of the books, and that's why I was wondering like, oh, with 6th edition or like whatever like revisions that they're going to do, like are they actually going to sell, like, or are people going to like when 4th edition came out, people like stuck with 3.5, right? And so that they didn't want, and for me I was just like, oh, if they come out with anything new after this, they're like, I'm just going to stay with 5e because that one, it's already malleable, so I can just like, why, if I want to add stuff, like I can, like I don't really need a new thing and changing it up, and just because I'm set in my ways now, like I already used to this. So I wonder,
I'm curious, what was the last 5th edition book that you actually bought?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. I think we might have Ravnica. Is that what?
Yeah, that is a book. Yeah.
I think that maybe that was the last one that we got. I can't, but I know it's been at least a couple years since we've actually purchased anything. But I forget which one it was. But yeah, because we just I'll look at like the Unearthed Arcana or something, like if they have certain updates on there, and when we do different when we I have what's it called, More Purple More Better is where I get my character sheets from, so then it kind of like autofill stuff, so then I'm like, well, whatever it has on here, that's kind of what I'm using anyway. But or and also too, like you said about like just kind of when we do our own thing, I let people like, oh, you want to make this spell more thematic to fit your character, like we can change that, like, and so I do a lot of homebrew, and especially now that they're like level 21, level 22, because we've just been going on for so long. So then I'm just like, I don't know, now I'm giving them like other superpowers and things and stuff. I'm like, well, you guys are gods now, so we're just gonna like, all the monsters you fight are gonna also just be god level, so we'll just keep going until but yeah.
High level play can be really interesting, but you've got to like, it can't really be mostly about the combat anymore, right? Because at that point you don't, that's just got to be secondary, because you're not going to be getting into that kind of epic fight every single session,
right? And it takes forever too. So
regarding what you were saying about the books, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen for sure. I mean, there are some signs nowadays that corporations are starting to kind of realize that they've been conned by the wokeists, like Warner Brothers and Netflix and well, obviously Twitter is about to be bought out by Iron Man. So, we've got, there's hope there. But, so this all might change, but I think that it's going to be very likely that even before 2024, Wizards is going to start having serious problems with sales of their products, because I think less and less people are going to be attracted to the sort of games they're making. I think that might be part of why they've now announced that the next 2 products that they're coming out with after this Radiant Citadel, which is about to come out now, which looks just total garbage, right? But anyways, after that one, they're going to be doing Dragonlance and Spelljammer, which are 2 classic 2nd edition era, first edition and second campaign books. Now they're going to wreck them, right? They're going to sell them.
Yes.
But we know that the original creators of Spelljammer and Dragonlance were not consulted in any way on these books. We know from the previews that they're going to be intentionally subversive of the setting, especially the Dragonlance book. It's clearly set up to like subvert the moralistic elements of the Dragonlance story. But people are going to buy it because it has Dragonlance on it. They're going to think they're going to get Dragonlance, and what they're actually going to get is woke garbage, right? So that might like I think that they did this knowing that they need to push up the numbers to keep fooling the executives at Hasbro that what they're doing is popular, right? But it won't be, because people won't be buying the new Dragonlance book because it's woke. They're going to be buying it because it says Dragonlance, and they're basically being misdirected. The problem is after that's going to cause worse trouble, because if people feel cheated by these books, they're going to be less likely to buy the next books. So there's always the death spiral of the wokeness. Get woke, go broke, right?
Right.
And I think there's a good chance that the wokeists might just all be purged from Wizards before they get to try to make another edition of D&D. But then what will happen after that? Who knows? What I do think is that if they get to that point and do this, that will be a jumping off point for anyone who's still left that actually is a real gamer and not just somebody who tweets about their character but doesn't actually ever play RPGs. And all the real gamers will leave there, and what they'll go to is the big question, because last time, like you said, with 4th edition, when 4th edition came out, it was clearly awful, right? You had a whole bunch of people that went over to Paizo produced this game called Pathfinder, which was based on 3rd edition, made a few changes to it, and so a whole bunch of people that were big fans of 3rd edition went there. You also had a whole bunch of people that went to the OSR. When 4th edition came out, that's when the OSR went from being this obscure design movement to booming and being the biggest indie RPG movement that exists now. So the OSR became very popular because 4E was garbage, right? And people started looking for other things, right? So part of it helped, this large game producer, Paizo, to make Pathfinder, and another part of it helped creating a lot of indie games. And there were, of course, some people, as you say, that just said, well, screw it, I still got my 3rd edition books, I'm just going to keep playing 3rd edition and not buy any new books, Right. So I think you'll see a similar thing will happen if Wizards keeps screwing up the current edition or jumps into a new, even more woke edition. You'll probably get some semi-large gaming company that will try to produce something that is basically a clone of 5th edition and try to swoop up the customers of the old 5th edition, because you will get a lot of people there. And then you're also going to get indie games that will be promoted, right? And I think one of the things that has happened is that because of the DMs Guild, which is this project that Wizards had where people can make third-party products for 5th edition, and you can publish them on Drive-Thru-RPG. Now Wizards takes half of your money for doing this, right? They take your own. It's a money-making scheme for them. So I don't know why people fall for it, right? But if they but there are some very successful books that have come out on the DMs Guild, right? Very successful third-party products. So I think that if 5th edition goes super woke, or if if they come out with a 6th edition that's super woke, you might end up having a breakaway from the DMs Guild of people making third-party products in a similar way to how people are doing with the OSR with old school D&D, that will be just creating their own 5th edition products that are 5th edition in everything but name, right? Because again, you can't copyright rules, right? So they'll make clones of 5th edition and might actually become innovative in the process. Maybe they'll finally end up using all those optional rules in the DM's guide for something, that's my dream, but who knows?
Yeah, we can only hope that maybe one day. Well, okay, since it's been nearly 2 hours, I have just one or two more games that I want to do before we wrap up. I have, what I like to do is a Cards Against Humanity thing where I just make you choose. You get your question. I don't know if you've ever played the game, but make you choose out of options on here. And then some of it, I was when I found this, this is kind of related to RPG stuff. So the question is, what will I bring back in time to convince people that I am a powerful wizard? And your options are, these are rather random: smallpox blankets, goblins, brown people, or the inevitable heat death of the universe. So one more time, it's what will I bring back in time to convince people that I'm a powerful wizard? Smallpox blankets, goblins, brown people, or the inevitable heat death of the universe? So what do you think is the best answer? Double or nothing for your points.
Well, I got to think about this a bit here.
Oh, yeah.
This is a tough one. I have a technical question. How exactly am I bringing goblins back into the past?
Ooh, well, you're a powerful wizard, right? So,
well, no, I think the question is, how do I convince people from the past that I'm a powerful wizard, right?
Back in time. Well, I bring back in time to convince people. I don't know. I'm not. I guess you can interpret this question. Are you're bringing it back in time to convince those people, or that you're going in time? Or you're going forward in time. So it's up to you. If you're a wizard, though, I imagine that you'd be able to figure out how to get goblins.
If I could take goblins back, I guess I would take goblins back. If there was some way. Yeah. Like, I mean, if they were laboratory grown goblins, then I could go in a time machine and convince people I made them because I'm a wizard. Well, great. You know, like.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah. And maybe you just actually are a powerful wizard and you were able to get goblins. Like, you're just trying to, but your powers, when you went through time, you've lost it. So you're only able to bring in like one thing to prove that you are this wizard.
Okay. All right.
However, I will take your interpretation of this however you want. But if goblins is your final answer.
That's right. That is my final answer. Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding. Then you are correct, sir. And you get double your points. I don't even remember where you're at. I think they're at 16 points. So you're up there on winning this episode. The final one that I play is, I don't even know which one to do on here. It's called Dirty Minds. And so I give you 3 hints to try and guess a word that is not dirty. It's very appropriate. The hints just sound like they're dirty.
Okay.
And some of these are really bad. Like, they do not describe the word well. And so people have trouble actually answering it. Some of them you can get on the first guess. But gosh. Let me see. One of these. Some of them are like too much. Okay. This one might be easy enough. So it's going to be 3 hints. If you get on the first one, you get 3 points. If you get on the second, you get 2 points. And if you get on the third, you get 1 point. So you'll get to guess after each hint. Okay. So hint number 1, when I'm hot, I rise.
Well, air.
Oh, that's a good answer, but that's not the one that we're looking for. So, but that was a good one. So hint number 2, sometimes yeast is a problem.
Bread.
Close. What's before it's bread?
It's bread.
Yeah, like before.
Dough.
Dough?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. So you get you got on the second try. The last hint was your fists can make me flaccid. So because you're having to knead it. But yes, dough is the correct answer. So I think you're at 18 points. And just for having such a great conversation, I'm going to double it again and give you 36 points. So you win. You win today's episode. It was a close race.
Has any guest ever lost their episode?
Anyway,
difficult questions to answer.
But thank you so much for joining me today. Can you tell people where? I mean, there's so much more obviously to talk to you about, and I really like learning a lot more about the RPG community and everything. But can you tell everyone where they can find you? And I'll put links in the description later, and all the stuff that you're like your merchandise and stuff that you're selling or working on now too. So advertise yourself.
All right. So first of all, you can find me on YouTube, the RPG Pundit, right? Kasimir Urbanski, the RPG Pundit. So that's where you can get my videos. And I'm on Twitter. I'm also Kasimir Urbanski on Twitter. You can find my fighting with SJWs on both of those things. As far as my products, you can get my products from a variety of publishers in a variety of places, but mainly DriveThruRPG and Amazon. So if you're interested in role-playing games, you want role-playing games that are not meant to be woke, but are just, they're not political in any way, really. They're just meant to be like really
fun,
interesting and innovative games that are for gamers, and source books that are for gamers, and stuff that is fully compatible with D&D, that you can use in your games, settings and adventures and all that stuff. So check out, Lion and Dragon and Arrows of Indra, The Invisible College, Dark Albion, Cults of Chaos. If I named them all, it would take a long time. But also, my PDF series, RPGPundit Presents. My newest product that is coming out probably within the next month or so, or by like early June at the latest, is going to be called Sword and Caravan. And it is a setting book. You could use it for any edition of D&D or for any OSR game, though it obviously goes really well with Lion and Dragon. Sword and Caravan is set, it's for role-playing in a medieval authentic world set in the Third Crusade, Deus Vult, and for role-playing along the Silk Road in the Middle Ages, So if you're interested in that kind of adventuring, you should keep an eye open. Yeah. Sword and Caravan probably become available sometime early in June.
Cool. Awesome. Early June. I need to make a note of that. But then DriveThruRPG. Yeah. And I put links in the chat now, but I'll put them all in the description later as well.
And I can send you some links to my products on.
Yeah, send me any link that you want. Like I will put all of them, as long as they're appropriate, into the description, so you can advertise everything if you want.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's been such a pleasure to have you on, and just to get to talk to someone who's like so enveloped in this too, because I haven't really had that yet. Like I've talked to more like comic book people lately because of John Delarose, so it's fun to get into like, let me talk to more RPG people. But yeah, I hope to talk to you again sometime. It was really awesome.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
And as a reminder to the audience too, again, book club on this Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Carter, and there are questions too for people who came in late. Carter, the intern, is out sick today because he's a little baby, and I guess he's bedridden or something. So I told him to take the day off. It's fine. If anyone has any questions or anything, you guys can message me as usual. But thank you again, RPG Pundit. This has been a lot of fun, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production may be upsetting to Brian Stelter. Please do not expose him to it. For completely legitimate reasons, Taylor Lawrence is requesting any information you may have about the following individuals. The Twitter subroutine appears to be malfunctioning. Pay no attention to it. Did you know that the word liberty is a dog whistle for insurrectionists? If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it. I mean, that's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.